Good morning and welcome back to day one of NWR's Virtual Investor Conference, Series 11. My name is Max Son and I will be your host for today. Up next this morning, we have BCAL Diagnostics. BCAL is an Australian screening and diagnostic company committed to the early, accurate diagnostics of breast cancer and therefore early intervention and improvement outcomes for women. This morning, we have BCAL Diagnostics CEO and Managing Director, Dr. John Hurrell, presenting. Before I pass it over to John, I do remind members, if you would like to ask questions throughout the session, please do so via the Q&A function. John, I'll now hand it over to you.
Good. Well, thanks very much. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to talk with you this morning. I'm the CEO of BCAL, and I want to talk to you today about our blood test for breast cancer and give you an update on where we are in the progress. The usual disclaimers. So currently there's no routine early detection tests for breast cancer. What we're doing is we're developing something that will create the opportunity for women who are in the breast cancer journey to have a simple, non-intimidating test that'll provide them with information about their status and be able to monitor what's occurring as they go through the treatment and pass along their journey. Just a brief introduction of myself. Joined the company in mid-February, about over 35 years experience in diagnostics, life sciences, been involved with very early stage companies and mature companies. And you know, I've done a lot of work in the diagnostics, specifically the diagnostics and product development areas, and I've run a fairly large commercial reference laboratory for Quest Diagnostics here in the US. Oops, wrong way. So as an introduction, about 1 in 7 women are going to be affected by breast cancer at some stage in their life. Probably many of you listening here have had some connection with breast cancer, either a friend, family, and so forth. Currently, the primary means of detection for women under the age of 40 is self-examination. For women within the guidelines of 40 years to 75 years, it's mammography. There's no simple test for either the screening or the surveillance of breast cancer. What we're doing is we're providing a simpler, more convenient, and less intimidating method than what's currently being used. Our investment highlights say an accurate, patient-friendly breast cancer test is what is the objective. So we have a test that's currently being tested on all stages of breast cancer. We have a test which is cheaper, easier to administer than the current gold standard, which is mammography. We'll provide an accurate identification, particularly in the early stages of cancer, which is where it's most valuable, and be independent of the age of the woman. Our test will provide improved access, particularly for those under the age of 40 that fall out of the current guidelines, and of course those people are in remote areas. So we have a clear strategy with a staged rollout in Australia, the US, and then ultimately the EU. We have an experienced board team and scientific advisory team with extensive expertise in diagnostics and in breast cancer. So let me give you some highlights of where we are and where we're going. So the persistent need. As I said, breast cancer affects approximately 1 in 7 women globally. In the US, about just under 300,000 women a year are diagnosed, and there's about 43,000 deaths. If you look at Australia, 20,000 women are diagnosed annually and about 3,000 deaths. On a global basis, it's a very large problem, particularly in developing economies. So the unmet need is, if we look down the breast cancer patient journey, in the US, there's about 91 million women who fall within the ages of 30 to 74. There's 39 million mammograms, but there are 52 million women who don't have access to mammograms, either by self-exclusion, they fall outside the guidelines, or they don't have access to the equipment for mammography. In the case of treatment, there's about 283,000 new breast cancer cases in the US annually, and about 3.8 million women are going through the process and have been diagnosed with breast cancer. Each stage along there, from discovery, screening, treatment, and surveillance, our test will have an impact. If we look at the unmet need in Australia, again, the numbers are huge. There's 3.3 million women who are currently out without access to annual mammograms because, again, they fall outside guidelines or they're in remote areas. So the unmet need, even in a smaller country like Australia, is fairly large. And the key to successful treatment and survivability of breast cancer, as with any cancers, is to identify and diagnose the cancer early. So if the later you find that you identify the cancer, the lower your chances of long-term survival. Currently, if you look at the size of the market, it's primarily an imaging market in the US. It's about $5 billion in 2019. It's going to projected to grow to $8.7 billion. And there's a smaller component, which is non-imaging, which is primarily BRCA testing, and so the EGRF receptor assay that's available. But again, that's not generally applicable. So the need there's a huge need, and the market is extremely large. So let's talk about BCAL, the company. So how does the BCAL test work? We take a blood test, a blood sample, just as we do for any blood test. You go to your GP or your doctor, you get a blood sample taken. We isolate or enrich small lipid droplets within the plasma. We extract the markers from those lipid droplets. We run it through a sophisticated piece of laboratory equipment, and then we do a data analysis of the biomarkers we identify. In this situation, the biomarkers are lipids. They're just a biomarker by another name. If you look at the clinical studies that we've currently completed, before 2017, we went through a whole series of studies in the US. There were proof of concept studies at the University of Louisville, the University of Kentucky. Then in 2017, we brought the technology to Australia. And these are the summaries of the cohorts that we've done our testing on today. In stages 1, 2, and 3, in cohorts 1, 2, and 3, we've tested early cancer, that's stages 1 or 2. You also notice that 50% of our tests are with controls, that is, women who don't have breast cancer. The other thing about those women who do have breast cancer, they're all early stage, what's called invasive carcinoma. In cohort 4 weeks, we've expanded the number. We've got about a third controls, but here we've expanded to late stage IDC, that's invasive ductal carcinoma. And we've also included stage 0, which is DCIS, and then another invasive carcinoma. So we're looking at all the different stages of cancer, and now we're starting to look at the different types of breast cancer. The bottom line there, you'll see, along the bottom, you'll see that the sum total is roughly just under 800 patients that we have actually tested. So I'll show you some results now. This is data in the form of what's called a ROC curve. It looks at sensitivity in the vertical axis and specificity in the horizontal axis. And then the AUC area under the curve represents the accuracy. That is, how well can our test distinguish between a positive and a negative? Breast cancer positive, breast cancer negative. So an AUC in that top left-hand corner of 0.85 means it's 85% accurate. So if you look at cohort 2, which is early stage 1 and 2, IDC, we have an accuracy of 0.85. If you look at cohort 3, 0.93, and so forth. The number of lipids we say there's the number of biomarkers that we're analyzing to get the result. so that we're taking 18 lipids, 18 biomarkers. We're doing an analysis. We're looking for how those change in the positive samples, and we're able to pick up what's called a lipid signature. So in total, we're able to come back with an accuracy of whether the woman has got breast cancer or not. In the case of cohort 3, we're accurate 93% of the time. If you look at cohort 4, where we're looking at late stage ILC, but also we're included here other types of breast cancer, we've still got an accuracy of 84%. And if we just look at the non-IDC, that is the more rarer forms of, or less frequently seen forms of breast cancer, we at 86% accurate. An interesting feature that came up was if we look at all of the cohorts together with 18 lipids, 18 biomarkers, we come up with an accuracy of 88%. But if we reduce the number of lipids just to 6, instead of 18, we still have an accuracy of 83%. Now that's interesting because we sent our data over to a company in Cambridge, England, and it was analysed by Dr. Runa Bansal, who's quite the expert on big data analysis. And she looked at it blindly, and she came back with strong candidate signatures, which were remarkably similar to the ones that we have already found. But more importantly, she said you could get very much the same result if you measured just 6 to 10 lipids, and we'd already done the 6. So we agreed with her totally. At the end of the report that she said was, our result make these lipid signatures rather conducive to commercialization. We're excited about the future developments on this test. So this gave us third-party independent evaluation of the data that we've already that we had generated in Sydney. So the question: how would the patients respond to a blood test for breast cancer? Now, these are 2 small focus groups that the company did prior to COVID closing things down. I've done in the US, and the first thing was, what are the women's experience with mammograms? Well, they were painful. There was issues related to false positives. There was an anxiety. There was a difficulty with scheduling. There was a fear of radiation. And there was just the whole issue of lack of privacy. So then we asked the question, well, if you had a test that did this, how would you respond to it? Well, overwhelming, it was positive. I guess we wouldn't be surprised about that. But 30% said they would choose the mammogram instead of a mammogram immediately if it was available. And 75% said that it would be included as part of their wellness exam. All of them said that, well, this would be a great adjunct to mammograms, particularly in the years between the times when they can get a free mammogram under the insurance situation in the US, which is approximately every 2 to 3 years. So what do women need to be able to take this test on board? Well, we asked them that question, and it's all about creating that strong credibility with the nurse, with the oncologist. But more importantly, they're willing to pay up to $300 US out of their own pocket rather than go through insurance if it wasn't covered. So this was a small sample, but it really gave us a lot of hope that this was, we're on the right track here, and that there was not only a big unmet need, but there would be people willing to even pay out of pocket a significant amount of money to get access to it. So the next steps in our clinical study, we're going to what's called cohort 5, which will basically help us to optimize the algorithm that we use to detect the breast cancer or not, and to establish a workflow. We need a workflow which is consistent with a regular clinical laboratory rather than an academic lab. And we're going to get about 1,000 participants in this cohort. The next cohort will be cohort 6, and that's where we're going to test out whether we can use it as an adjunct to mammography. And we'll be validating our algorithm, and that'll take about 2,000 participants. And in the future, we'll do a cohort 7, which will be a monitoring. We're testing the surveillance. Can we surveil breast cancer patients during and after treatment? And there'll be about 2,500 participants in that cohort. And that's an area that surveillance is an area that's really there's nothing there that today that patients can rely on to follow their recurrence of disease. So our commercialization strategy is initially it will be an adjunct to traditional mammography to help improve the accuracy. Then the monitoring, as I said, the whole issue of how the patients are monitored during treatment, and then more importantly, after treatment, nothing available today. And then there'll be the preventative where there's very high risk women under the age of 40, for example, who tend when they get breast cancer, get a very aggressive form of breast cancer, but they fall out of the guidelines unless they have some identifiable high risk situation such as a BRCA or a BRCA2 gene. So we'd like to have a blood test that would give those women some peace. And then there's a diagnostic, which is, take pretty much all women everywhere and be able to just take a blood sample and be able to detect whether or not they have breast cancer. Our pathway to commercialization, we have near-term objectives. Firstly is to finalize the selection of the biomarkers. That's well in hand, obviously. We want to transfer this to an NATA accredited laboratory. That's in progress. We want to develop an in-house IVD, or as we call it in the US, LDT. That is, we're just starting on that now. The analytical performance, we will continue to monitor that and improve it as we go through the different cohorts. Cohort 5 obviously is going to be important. We'll start that later this year, and then cohort 6 will start early next year. Cohort 7, we hope to start the latter part of next year. So we have a pathway, and the pathway we've got a series of objectives. On the bigger scale, this is the pathway to commercialization in a US and Australia. And here I've got a number of milestones and inflection points, including a patent application which we're about to file. There's the validation, continue to validate our biomarkers. Tech transfer, we're setting up relationship with a US company to help us with validating the samples in the US, setting up an LDT in the US, setting up an LDT in Australia, and then going through the regulatory process of an IVD. And that'll take us through to the end of roughly 2025. With a test as complex as this in terms of development, we need partners. And one of the key partners we have is GenesisCare. We've got a master services agreement with them. And from this map, you can see how important they would be to us, because they have a large number of centers, particularly in the US, where they actually treat different cancers. And we're about to start working with them in a higher level of activity in the second half of this year. Other key partners are, that we have set up, and again, I say partners are really critical to our work. Intellectual property, we have a license from the University of Louisville, which actually covers us back to 2011 and will take us through to 2031. We have numerous claims that have been, patents that have been granted in different countries. And we're about to file our own patent application here in the very, very near future. We have a number of different research and development partners, including those for the Baker Institute, for example, with their lipidomic group, Thermo Fisher with their equipment, ISON, where we're looking at some specific isolation techniques. And then there's several groups that we're working with for data analytics. We like to have more than one group look at the data. So we have multiple partners there. Then the clinical studies, we have relationships with a number of key breast screening centers in Australia. And then downstream, of course, GenesisCare, where we'll be hopefully be in partnership with them when we enter the market. The people, We have a stellar board of directors. Jane Shaw, of course, is well known in the breast cancer industry, if you like, the breast cancer area. And she's the executive chair. Ron Phillips, again, heavily involved with healthcare policy and particularly the Sydney Breast Clinic, and was previously the Minister for Health in New South Wales. Jonathan Trollope, international business and lawyer, businessman and lawyer. Marilyn Slee, who's well known in the biotech industry in Australia and has been involved in developing and selling biotech companies overseas. And then Mark Burrows, who's an international financier. We're lucky to have Mark on board. The executive team, as our chief scientist, we have Dr. Amani Batase. We have Guy Robertson as our CFO. Alison Cook provides us with regulatory and particularly regulatory and some commercialization expertise. And then one of our most recent hires, Amanda Keglenberg. She's an expert in clinical trials and biobanking, and she's joined the company and she's taking on the role of Director of Clinical Affairs. In the US, we have Kim Ekros. He's technically in Europe, but he does a lot of work in the US and he's a global expert in lipidomics. We have Dr. David Peake. David's another expert in lipidomics and particularly around mass spectrometry, and has written some of the software used in one of the software programs that's used in the lipid area called Lipid Search. And then we have Dr. Jinju, who she had 12 years with the FDA and is a consultant to a number of companies in the diagnostics industry. She's our regulatory consultant in the US. And then finally, we have our clinical and scientific advisory group. Craig Getty, an oncologist up in Newcastle, Dr. Sanjay Warrior, breast surgeon, Dr. Cindy Mack, breast surgeon, and Professor Dr. Mary Rickard, who is a world expert on mammography. And finally, Peter Makel, who's down at the Baker Institute and an expert on metabolomics, and particularly part of metabolomics, lipidomics. So we have an excellent group of scientific advisors. So in summary, there's a large unmet need for a simple, accurate blood test for breast cancer. The BCAL test is sensitive, specific, but highly accurate. It's cheaper, easier, and more accessible than mammography, which is currently the gold standard, as I said. We believe the global market is in excess of $2 billion. We have a clear commercialization pathway with milestones which we're meeting. We have clinical studies underway and will continue to do so to confirm and validate our test performance. We are transferring the technology to multiple external third-party laboratories. We're setting up an operation in the US. We have studies currently underway to understand the US market in particular, but also in Australia, to how do we enter this and how do we get the greatest medical utility in the shortest time. And then we have an experienced team of board members, management team, and advisors in place. That's the BCAL story, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss it with you, and happy to take questions.
Thanks, John. We'll get straight into the questions, and just a reminder to everyone on the call that you can submit questions via the Q&A function. First question is, how does your test compare to multi-cancer early detection tests being developed by companies like Grail, Guardant, and Exact?
Yeah, those companies are using genetic markers or proteomic markers, and they are, as they said, broad omic cancer tests. We're very focused on breast cancer with this. So in terms of how it's received by the regulatory authorities, I think we'll be much more clearer in how we can apply our test. We're not applying it outside of the breast cancer. We don't see that at the moment as being our focus. Grail and Guardant and these others are trying to be basically detect any types of cancer. In some areas, they're getting some positive results, but overall, we believe our approach is going to be much more specific, and will certainly we'll be able to get good clinical data that is probably not within the reach of some of these other companies. Of course, they got more money than we have.
Must be nice. Next question is the company engaging with the breast cancer community, and how is it doing this, and what feedback is being received?
Yes, well, we are heavily engaged, actually. In fact, just last week, Jane, our executive chairman, and Mary Rickard spent time with a group called So Brave. This is a group of basically women under the age of 40 who have breast cancer, and they've engaged with them. We've actually engaged with them multiple times, and we've been almost overwhelmed with the response. So overall, we are engaging all the way through. We talk with all the breast clinics, and we seek to work with them if we can. But that engagement is a very critical part of us moving forward, not only in commercialization, but letting the breast cancer community know that there's something coming that is going to help them. And Thanks. Right now, there's not a lot after they've gone through treatment that they can rely on to determine how they're progressing.
Thanks. And just one last question before we wrap up. Having recently commenced as CEO, what do you see as the biggest challenges for BCAL to work through?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is really getting the message out there, particularly in the US, and also in Australia still, to let women know that we are testing, that we are building a database, that we're looking for specimens, and that the more specimens we get, the faster that we'll get the test out on the market. So I think that's our largest challenge at this point. The technology seems to be robust to all the testing that we've done, and it's just for us to get more data, get more samples, and then we'll be able to, give the test put the test in the hands of the oncology community and the breast cancer community.
Thanks, John. That wraps up this morning's session. Just